Hi, I'm Kelly from Kelly J Jewellery, and today I'm going to be talking about the basics of wire wrapping. I'm going to be showing you, talking about all the different wires, what goes with what, and tools. There's a lot of tools out there. What do you need and what's the best type of tools to go for. I'll go through basic weaving techniques, different styles of weaving, different weaves, and we'll wrap a few stones, beads, we'll do a few chain links, ear wires, and take it from there. Hopefully I'll answer any of your questions you've got about wire wrap in the comments below. So let's get started. So first let's talk about wire. I always go for dead soft because it's easier to manage, it's easier to bend, it's just generally easier to work with. So I always go for dead soft. And if you're going to do weaving, you're going to need a thick wire, which is referred to as a base wire, and you're going to need a fine wire, which will then be your weaving wire. So you need to match these two wires up, and everybody has their personal favourites. I love 0.8mm base wire, which is 20 gauge, and a 0.315mm weaving wire, which is 28 gauge. Sometimes it's better to have a stronger base wire, so then you can go for 1mm on your base wire, and then for your weaving wire you would probably prefer something a bit thicker, so you could go for a 0.4, which is a 26 gauge. So a 1mm is 18 gauge and the 0.4 would be 26. Some people prefer that. I like the 0.3 because I find it sits easier between the weaves, so I find that actually easier to work with. You want to use silver wire. I use silver filled wire. This is sterling silver on the outside, but it's been filled with soft copper as a core through the centre of it. And again, I've got 0.8 of my base wire, and I've got 0.315 of my weaving wire. This is silver filled as well, so this would be 20 gauge and 28 gauge. And again, if you wanted to go for something a bit thicker, you've got the 1mm and the 0.4mm is your weaving wire, so that would be your 18 gauge and your 26 gauge for your basic weaves, that is. For your jump rings, and when you need that thicker, chunkier wire to do your nice chunky jump rings, I use this. This is also dead soft, but because it's so thick it's quite tough to bend, but it's good for doing your jump rings and that. This is 1.5mm wire. You can use anything above 1mm that will make your jump rings nice and strong, and we'll make a few jump rings in a minute with that. I'm in the UK, so I buy my copper from Metal Clays. I've heard there's some great suppliers in the US if you're over there. So you've got Rio Grande, I don't know how you pronounce it, and there's a few more over there that are fantastic monster slayers. So I wind my weaving wire onto one of these little bobbins, and this just, when you're weaving, it sort of stops your wire flying around all over the place. It gives it a nice weight, so it just stays in one place as you're weaving here. And these are by Beadsmith. These are called Bob Ease by Beadsmith, and you just wind your wire onto there, and they're quite good to use. Also, you may buy a tutorial that requires that you use lots of different sizes of gauges of wires. So there are lots of other sizes, not just these ones that I prefer. These are the ones that I work with in particular. So let's talk about tools. There are so many different types of tools available. So many different types of pliers. What do you go for? Where do you start? And they've all got different shaped ends. We've got chain nose, flat nose. I love these bent ones. Getting into awkward places. Got cutters. You need to get yourself a good pair of wire cutters. These are flush cutters. So you always have this flat side towards the wire that you're going to be keeping. It'll cut it nice and flat. Round nose pliers. Got some really fine ones. These are my favourite ones. And these bail pliers, these are very useful. And all of these tools come in all different shapes and sizes. Nylon pliers. You will need nylon pliers at some point, and they are fantastic to have handy at all times. Absolutely brilliant. And you can buy little replacement heads, so they will last you forever. I generally go for Beadsmith or xuron pliers, all available on eBay. I think I've bought all mine through eBay. These again are Beadsmith. These are my favourite ones. So generally you'll need a pair of pliers, a pair of round nose pliers. You need to get yourself some good cutters, and it would be handy to have the nylon pliers as well, but that's not essential to start with because you can always just use your fingers. But these are your three main tools that you're going to need to get you started. And then later on, as you want to try new things, these are fantastic for doing all your, I use these sizes for doing the ear wires and for jump rings. So I would be lost without these. These are brilliant. So let's practice a few weaves. I've cut some short lengths of 0.8 wire, that's 20 gauge. These are about just 6 inches long, just short lengths. So we can go through a few different weave patterns. And I've got some 0.315, which is 28 gauge wire, onto my bobbin. So we start with a basic weave over 2 wires. Take your weaving wire. All I've done with my weaving wire is wound a bit off, so my bobbin's just hanging down. What you want to do is wrap 3 times around that bottom wire, and this is just to secure the weaving wire to the base wires. I'm just going to go around that bottom wire 3 times just to get it in place. Now if you're working from a pattern, or if you're doing a tutorial, they'll tell you whereabouts on the wires they want you to start. Sometimes you start towards the beginning, sometimes you'll start halfway through. So get your wire attached, and then holding those 2 wires together, we're going to wrap around both of the wires now. Try not to pull the wires too close together as you do so. So over both of the wires, we'll go around 3 times. So whenever you're weaving, it's always best to keep pushing your weave together as you go, because it keeps it nice and tidy. So we've got 3 wraps around the bottom wire, 3 wraps around the top wire. Both the wires, sorry. So we'll carry on now. We'll do another 3 around the bottom wire. And then we go again 3 times around the 2 wires. this is your basic 3-3 weave. So I'll do that a few more times. 3 times around the bottom wire. Three times around both wires. And you can repeat that as many times as you like, and to have a good practice on doing this, keep weaving now along your wires until you feel comfortable with that 3-3 weave. Another thing to remember as you're weaving is it's best to have these 2 wires apart at the ends, so you can scoop them out a little bit towards the ends. It just makes it a bit easier to get your wire between there as you're weaving. So keep these wires nice and tidy together, but as they reach the ends, allow your wires to come out a little. Just makes it a little bit easier. So I've done a few more repeats of that 3-3 weave, and that's what it looks like. When you've done a weave, I like to just go over it with the pliers and flatten it, just makes it look pretty. So that's the 3-3 weave, and you'll see this used quite a lot in lots of different designs. Another thing to remember when you're weaving, when you've finished, is to try and get that wire cut really close where it finishes. And you don't want any sharp bits sticking out either, so you want to flatten down that last little bit that's left. To finish it off. So now let's go on to a different weave. If you take 3 wires, again I'm using the 0.8 that we cut earlier, and I'm using my 0.3 1/5 weaving wire, so that's 20 gauge and 28 gauge. Again, when you're following a tutorial or a pattern, they'll tell you where to start on your wires. So as before, you want to start by attaching it to the bottom wire. I'm just going to curve these wires out a little bit on the ends. It does make it a bit easier for weaving if your wires sit apart at the other end. So we're going to go 3 times around that bottom wire to attach the weaving wire to the base wires. So now we're going to do a 2-2 weave over 3 wires. So I'm holding them so I've got an equal gap between each of my wires, and I hold them quite firm so that they don't move around too much. So we're going to go around the bottom 2 wires, and then again around the bottom 2 wires. Then I'm going to come back up between those bottom 2 wires. I'm going to go straight over the top, and now I'm wrapping around the top 2 wires, so I want to come up between those bottom 2 wires again, over the top. So I've got 2 wraps around the bottom 2 wires and 2 wraps around the top 2 wires, and that's the repeat. So coming under the wires, I'm going to go straight over 2, wrap around the bottom 2 twice, up between those bottom 2, over the top, between the bottom 2 again, over the top. So now that's 2 wraps around the top 2 wires. Push the weave together as we go to keep it tidy. I'm going to repeat this until you get comfortable with this type of weave. And as you go in, you'll notice that these wires, they keep moving, constantly keep moving, and you have to keep putting them back where you want them to be. So keep repeating this 2-2 weave until you feel more comfortable with that, and it won't be very tidy to start with. I've done this weave a lot of times, and you'll find this is a very common weave. You'll see it in lots of different designs. So have a play with that and keep going until you feel comfortable with it. So that's what it looks like. I've done a few more repeats on that 2-2 weave. Again, I like to just flatten it down with my nylon pliers. And when you're done, take your cutters and aiming the flush part towards the wire that you're keeping. You're going to cut it as close as you can. And you always still get a little tail. Well, I do. Squash that into place so it doesn't snag on anything. And I always give it a little pull as well before I cut it, so it's nice and tight, and then cut that as flush as you can. Flatten that down as well. So that's another type of weave that's used quite a lot actually. So now take 4 wires that we cut earlier. There's 0.8 again, which is 20 gauge, and I'm using 0.315 weaving wire, which is 28 gauge. It's just my favourite combination of wires for weaving. If you prefer to do it with thicker wires, go for the 1mm and the 0.4 on the weave. So again, once you've decided whereabouts you're going to start on your wires, and just a tiny little gap between the wires, and at this end you want to shape them a little bit so it's easy to get between them with your weaving wire. Leaving just a short tail there so you've got something to hold on to. We're going to wrap 3 times around that bottom wire. Again, this is just attaching the weaving wire to the base wires. So I'm going to do just a basic zigzag type weave. So you want to go, to start with, we'll go over the bottom 2 wires. And don't pull on it too tight because you'll pull those wires together. If you pull it too tight, the wires will close and then you won't be able to get your weaving wire in between those to do your next weave. So we'll go around those bottom 2 wires twice. Come up between those bottom 2 wires. And we'll go over the next 2 wires. So you're going over the second and the third wire. And you need to come up between those bottom 2 wires and over that second and third wire again, then come up between the middle 2 wires, up between your second and third wire and straight over the top. So now you're going over the top 2 wires, back up between the middle 2 and over the top again. You weave together as you go. So coming back down, we're going to go between the bottom 2 wires and over the middle 2 wires, so you're going over the second and third wire. Again between the bottom 2 wires, over that third wire, so you're wrapping around the middle 2 wires. Coming underneath the bottom wire now, you're going to go over the second wire. So you go between those middle 2. Then you do that again under the bottom wire and over the second wire. And that's a repeat. Another basic weave that you'll get over 4 wires. You'll see this a lot. So you go in between bottom 2 wires to continue the zigzag around those middle 2 now, between the bottom 2, and then over the 3rd one, so you wrap around those middle 2, up between the middle 2 wires, over the top, back up between those middle 2 wires, over the top. You can see the repeat between the bottom 2, over the 3rd wire, between those bottom 2, over the 3rd wire, under the bottom wire, and then over that 2nd wire. So you wrap the bottom 2 wires to finish it off. Push it together, and you're going to keep repeating this weave till you feel comfortable with it, and it gets you used to handling the wires. And try it in different gauges as well. Try it with the thicker gauge weaving wire, try it with the thicker gauge base wires, and see what you find you're most comfortable with. Most tutorials and patterns that you buy, you can alter the wires that it recommends, so you can shift it maybe just one size up or down, and you'll still get away with a similar end result, whether it may be a little bigger or smaller. So I'm going to repeat this a few more times to show you what it looks like. There are no limitations when it comes to weaving and wire wrapping, because really all that limits you is how creative you can be with what you're doing. So you could take this weave and you could now swap to a different weave and then go back to this weave. You could do this weave, and at the end of the zigzag you could wrap a few times around this bottom wire and then do another zigzag. So you're making it your own. And I think really with weaving and wrapping, it's all about finding your own style and what you are comfortable with. If you buy a tutorial and you really like it and you've made it the way it says, why not have a go at making it again and put all your own weaves in there and add your own style, finish it off in a slightly different way, and it makes it all your own. So there are no rules, it's only how creative you want to be or how you feel at the time. You make the same thing as your friend, and you'll both have completely different finished results, and it's absolutely lovely to see all the different versions of the same tutorials that are made. So there are no rules, you don't have to do exactly as I'm doing. You can do whatever you want as you go. It's just getting comfortable with it, finding the better way to do things rather than the right way to do things. Compress your weave as you go, keeps it nice and tidy. And that's what that zigzag weave looks like. Finished over 4 wires. You could do this over 5 wires, apply the same kind of thing, or 6 wires. So that's my zigzag. I've done a little bit more. You don't have to do this with the nylon pliers. I just like how it looks if you flatten it down a bit. That's just me. Now I'm going to cut off that tail again at the beginning and the end. I give it a pull to make it nice and tight, so that when I cut it, it is wrapped quite tightly around there. Flush side of the cutters towards the wire that you're keeping. And then I'll flatten those little ends of wires down. And that's that. One over the 4 wires. It's that type of zigzag weave. Another interesting weave to do is a figure of 8 weave. So I've taken 2 of the 0.8mm wires, which is 20 gauge. I've done a little bit of a weave on there just to hold them together. So I've done 3 wraps around the bottom wire and 3 wraps around the 2 wires. The first one that we did, 3-3 wrap. And what you do for a figure of 8 weave, it's when your wires slightly come apart and you carry on weaving over them. So this weave will go over the wires as the wires open up. So separate those wires out a little bit. And the way I do this is not necessarily the way everybody else does this. Like I say, you can do whatever you like as you go. These are just the basics to get you started. So my weaving wire is coming underneath the bottom wire, and I'm going to take it straight over the top to get myself in the right position. And now I'm going to come in between those 2 wires. So I've come over the bottom wire, and I'm going to wrap around that bottom wire a couple of times. So the idea of this weave is that you do a figure of 8 and then you wrap around that wire a few times. So I'm going to go over the top wire and I'm going to wrap around that wire a few times. Then I'm going to go over the bottom wire and wrap around that wire a few times, over the top wire, and I'm going to wrap around that one a few times, and over the bottom wire. So you can see how it's a figure of 8 with an extra wrap. So we'll go around that one twice, over the top, and around that wire again. We'll come in between and over the bottom. Now as you go in, try not to pull those wires together. So I've gone over the bottom wire. I'll go around that twice. And this can look really pretty. You can use it in all sorts of different designs. And it is very commonly used. Sometimes I've noticed people can wrap 3 times or even 4 times between these wraps. It spaces out those cross sections in the middle. So depending on the amount of wire you're wrapping along in between the crossover, depends on how far apart those middle ones are spaced. So if we keep going with just wrapping a couple of times, and then I'll increase that and show you what it looks like in a while. So I'm just going to repeat that a few more times so you can see what it looks like. So as you can see, there's 2 wraps around, or an extra wrap around with a figure of 8 weave. The middle wires are spaced out nicely like that. If you just went immediately around the one and around the other and then back around this one in a full figure of 8 type weave, these middle wires would be very close together. So I'm now going to wrap 3 times around in between each one, so you can see what that looks like. So I've gone over the top wire, and then I'll go 1, 2, 3 times around, then I'll come between the 2 and go over the bottom wire, 1, 2, 3 times around, over the top wire, 1, 2, 3 times around. So awkward to do this behind the camera. Over the bottom wire, 1, 2, 3, and I'll repeat this a few more times so you can see how it spaces out that middle wire. I've done a few more repeats, as you can see, these are the middle bars on these are nice and tight together, and then with the extra wraps around the edges they're getting more spaced out now. If I add an extra wrap, and I'll do 4 wraps, you'll see how it'll space out even more. So that's with 4 wraps in between, so you've got even more spacing towards the end. So you really can do anything you want. If you add more wires than this, you can have another wire on this side and another wire on this side, and you could do this 3-3 wrap here, but after each repeat go over the opposite wire, and then when you reach onto this side you could then do the 3-3 wrap again on these 2 wires, so you end up with this lovely weave down the middle, which you'd have additional weaves down each sides. There are so many different things you could do, and that's what makes it so great, and everybody's pieces all end up being so different. It is also used for bails on pendants, so it is very useful. It's a little bit tricky when you start with, because as you pull in your wires over to the side you tend to pull these 2 wires back together, so you have to try not to let your wires come together. Always keep your hand, if you can, closer to where you've got to. If I was weaving now, I'd hold it here so that I'm keeping the wires apart. Clip that one off as well. Flush side towards the wire that we're keeping. Flatten off those ends. Let's move on to make a few jump rings and bracelet ends. This is my 1.5mm wire, which is, I think is about 14 gauge. And for cutting big thick wire like this I won't use my normal cutters. I use these big manly cutters and I'll cut. So we can just have a little piece to play with. So now I'm using my bail pliers, because this wire is really tough to bend, but it's effective with jewellery because you need it to be tough. You need your clasps on your bracelets to be tough. So what I'm going to do is I need a flush cut on that end. And I'm going to take my smallest size one and gripping it as far in on the end as I can. I'm going to wrap around, gently turning the pliers and guiding the wire around to get this shape on the end. Then I'm going to grip it on a slightly larger size. Now I'm going to bend the wire around the plier so you can see the shape I'm going for. That's why I love these pliers. So now when I get to this end, I'm going to take the smaller size again, right there, and I'm going to wrap the wire over the plier. Like this. Cut that end off, having the flush side facing towards a wire that I'm keeping. I'm going to curl that in with my round nose pliers, and I'm going to go more towards the middle to the base of my pliers because I don't want to break my pliers. Big thick wires break pliers. Just to get that the right angle, I'm going to tilt that a little bit. This is the first part of the clasp. I'll show you my bracelet. So what I've made is this piece, and then this attaches to your bracelet and it can go through a jump ring. The other end, I'm going to need another flush end to that wire. I have killed a few pairs of little cutters with this thick wire, and using my smallest size again, I'm going to go around, turning the plier around, holding the wire steady so you get that shape. And then go for the larger size. I'm going to go for this size, and I'm going to take the wire around the plier, and then I'm going to cut this about here, and I'll finish this bit with my round nose pliers. I need to cut a bit of length off that. So you can see what I'm trying to make here. So I'm going to close that ring at the top, just to make a little figure of 8. I've got a smaller loop at the top and a larger one at the bottom. So this is really chunky wire, so you could use this for a bracelet, and then you'd attach this end to the one bracelet side and this to the other. And you could do this and have this as a necklace end. You could use smaller wire. This is 1mm wire, this is 18 gauge, and if you want to do what I just did for a necklace end rather than a chunky bracelet end, now I can use my normal cutters because I'm back on normal sized wire. You can do exactly the same thing, so I'm taking again the smallest size. I'm going to wrap it around there. Keep turning the pliers till it meets and I get that shape. Then I'll go for a bigger size. And I'll bring the wire around, make that shape. And then going for the smaller size again, a little further up. Bend the wire around. Cut it nice and small. Cutting it so you've got the flush side facing towards the wire that you're keeping, so you get a nice flat edge. And take my round nose pliers. Finish that off. Need to lose that gap really. And when you've finished and you've got the final shape that you're happy with, and on the thicker wire as well, you can hammer it, and it gives it that bit of extra strength. You'll stop it bending out of shape. So I'm just going to close that one as well. Always want to finish off your curls with closing them, because otherwise they'll snag on clothing or whatever. So for an extra strength on that, you could hammer that. You'll need a steel plate. You can just gently hammer straight onto the surface. I like to hold it still as I'm hammering, so I'll hold it there, and then I'll hammer all of this round section, and it gives it a nice flat edge, and it stops it bending out of shape. So taking the rest of the 1mm wire, I'll do the other end. I want a flush end to start with, on the smaller size again. A nice round end. It's so tricky to do this from behind the camera, I'm so sorry if you can't see. So we've got this shape again. Then I'll use a bigger size. I'll use this one. And I'll just sit that against the top there. And the wire around. So you can see the shape already there. Oops. Cut that where I want it to stop. Oops. Pull that into place. And again, you can hammer that for extra strength. Another way of finishing that off, to have a more secure finish. If you start as we did before and do a loop around the top. And then go ahead and carry on as if we were doing what we did just. So you've got that nice figure of 8 as a clasp for you. The end of your necklace. You could bend this wire around that wire there. What you do is just finishes it off a bit more securely. And I'm going to cut that there. My pliers to flatten it off a bit. Squeaky pliers. So you've got a figure of 8, but wrapping it around the top there makes it a bit more secure. So if you attach that end to your one chain, and then this end to the other chain, got a nice necklace fitting. And making things like this gets you used to how the wires bend, and it kind of strengthens up your fingers a bit with getting used to handling the wires. And you'll notice to start with that your fingers get all sore. Everybody gets it, really sore and dry skin. But you do toughen up over time. I still get sore fingers from wire weaving. So a few interesting little clasps there. To make a basic jump ring, I'll do it with this really thick wire, because I really love the chunky jump rings I always add chunky jump rings to my pendants. I find they give strength and they look nice being so thick. So choose a size and hold it as close to the edge as you can. I'm going to wrap around a few times, just keep going around. And I'm using my really big pliers. So you could use a double chunky jump ring if you wanted to. You might want to get a file and just file off these sharp edges because they can be a bit sharp. And cut into that middle wire. And you've got a couple of jump rings now. One of these will have a flush end and one will have a spiky end. We just want to cut that spiky end off like that. We've got ourselves a little jump ring. It's not perfect, but it does the job and it looks nice. And I like to bend the ends just over a little bit so they touch each other properly. So there we go, a little jump ring. And if you're when you're opening and closing jump rings, use 2 pairs of pliers and always twist it this way. When you're keeping your round shape, you attach it to what you need to attach it to, and then attaching your pliers, grabbing it with your pliers, you bend it back. If you try and open it by pulling it open, as in you try and pull it so there's a hole in the middle, you pull it open this way, you're going to misshape the ring, and when you try and push it back together, you're not going to end up with a nice shape. So always when you open and close jump rings, oops, you always bend them, so you're bending them from this middle part. You can also do, if you wrap it around a few more times, again you'll need to file these edges off, a triple jump ring, which works well as a bail to add to the top of a pendant for your chain to pass through. You need to add it onto your work as you're working.